Hello, everyone. I'm Leslie Rohde, and welcome to Ask the Lawyers. We're glad you've joined us today for a discussion about debt settlement. We're thankful to have attorney David Shuster with us today to answer some questions, and he's with Shuster Law in the greater Dallas area. Thank you so much for joining us, David.
No, my pleasure, Leslie. Thanks.
Let's begin with a basic breakdown of what debt settlement is.
Debt settlement is just a way to resolve your debt without paying the entire balance alleged or on the original terms that the creditor would have you pay, right? So pay a lower amount to resolve the debt.
So there has to be pros and some cons if you want to enter into something like this.
Well, yes. I mean, in order to settle a debt for less, it has to go into default. So the con would be that, your credit score is going to take a hit, right? That's the con. And you might get some unwanted phone calls, et cetera. But the pros are to save money.
And in the end, be a little bit more debt-free, I would hope.
Exactly right. Yeah, if you can save money, you can get out of debt quicker. So yeah, the short-term hit is usually worth it. I mean, everyone's situation is different, but yeah, I mean, the idea is like taking a hard look at the terms of the loan, whether it's, a lot of times it's just multiple credit cards. And if you really, take a hard look at how much interest you're paying each month, and if you, continue to make the same payment or a certain amount more, how long is it going to take you to get out of debt? So those are the kinds of things that you want to take a look at, and then and that's when you kind of realize, okay, well, it's worth it to take a hit on my credit if I know I can get out of debt in 3 years instead of 7 years, and I can pay, $35,000 instead of potentially $100,000.
Yeah, that's quite a bit of savings. You mentioned the hit on your credit. What does this do, or what can this do to your credit?
Well, it'll show the late pays and the defaults and write-offs, and so yeah, credit score will tank out very quickly. But then, depending upon how long it takes you to save up the money to settle, you can just, your credit score will be updated and repaired, so you can, get back to that original credit score in a reasonable amount of time, just depending upon how quickly you can save up the money to settle the debt.
So what if creditors don't want to cooperate with the debt settlement organization? Are there options? Are there ways that you can go about dealing with that?
Yes, and so when you talked about debt settlement organizations, right, that's not necessarily what I am. I'm a local attorney. I can do the same thing. And so, yeah, the debt settlement organizations are very popular. Fortunately, there's been some regulations that require them to not actually collect a fee until they begin to not only negotiate, but actually pay one of the debts, right? So these programs, I think that's what you're speaking of. If you have multiple creditors, you throw them into your debt settlement program. The names aren't coming to mind right now, but it really doesn't matter. If you heard a radio advertisement or something about get out of debt, go into this program, that still involves defaulting on everything, right? Credit score hit, the whole 9 yards. But you make a good point where there's usually, when I get a phone call, is when one of the creditors doesn't want to cooperate, doesn't want to be in the program, right? And then you have a problem. So, but as an attorney who handles debt settlement for clients, I mean, you don't really have an option but to work with me and to settle it.
So any kind of scams out there in some of these organizations or people who deal with these debt settlements?
Yeah, you have to be careful. There definitely are scams. I haven't seen as many as I used to see, and so largely because of the government cracking down on these organizations a little bit. But yeah, I mean, you want to these days you can look things up to make sure you're dealing with a reputable place. But again, that's I recommend using a local attorney, right? And so if it makes sense and your debt is big enough, and my fee to a client who wants to settle debt is typically no greater than the fee that person would pay to a debt settlement company, which may or may not be a scam. And really the scam is more so that you're paying a company, a person to basically just do the same thing that the client could do on their own. And if there's no litigation and they just have a few accounts, you have to take a hard look at how much am I paying this company, and could I just offer each creditor the same amount of money? You definitely can. I'll tell any client that calls me that, hey, you can do this yourself. This is what it involves. And it's just a matter of, how many creditors do they have? How busy are they? is there one that's about to file a lawsuit against them? And I like to give the client as much information as possible before they decide to move forward. And yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that all these debt settlement companies are not a worthwhile endeavor, but most of the time it is not a worthwhile endeavor, and it's better to do it yourself or contact a local attorney.
And when you do get calls from people wanting to settle some debt, give us an idea of what type of debt settlement they're looking for. What are some common things that are happening?
A lot of people don't really know. You can call, I mean, I get calls all the time where, hey, I'm current on all of the cards, right? I have $85,000 of credit card debt, revolving unsecured debt, right? $85,000 and all I'm doing is making the minimum payments and I can't keep it up any longer, right? And so in that case, we sit down and we just go over everything. I mean, we know that the credit's going to tank out when they stop paying. So is there anything that they need to do before that happens, right? So just plan for it, Then we take a look at what kind of money they can save every month. And I typically just have them, save the money on their own. A lot of times there is another, piece of real estate that they're going to sell at a certain date in the future. Or take a loan out against. And so we want to have a plan where, we know that in 1 year or 2 years or sooner that there's going to be some money to settle the debt. That's usually the biggest problem, right? So we want to go over with the client that, yeah, I can send cease and desist letters and I can respond to this lawsuit, but what is the plan with, coming up with some money? And we talk about the percentages. I mean, you usually shoot for 50%, to get rid of the debt for 50%. It all depends. That's just an average. I mean, sometimes, the pennies on the dollar settlements are great. They can, settle a $10,000 debt for $2,500. Usually that means there's something wrong with it, which brings me to the next point that sometimes if you just don't pay long enough and they pass it around to debt buyers, the stuff is not going to hold up in court and you don't have to pay anything. Ultimately, my goal is going to be the same as the goal of the client, which is to pay the least amount of money to get out from under this debt, utilizing the available defenses that you have under the law and requiring the creditors to prove up the debt if it does go that far to litigation. And, not that anyone wants to wait 5 years for this process to be done, but if you do default on all your debt and you don't get any lawsuits in over 4 years, they've lost their right to collect, right? So, I've seen a lot of debt that goes away by just them sitting on their hands and not doing anything. So there's a lot more to it than you think. Definitely, it's way worth it to contact a local attorney if you can find one, rather than using a debt settlement program.
You have to have seen a lot of relief from your clients who work through this process with you, because it can be a big load on people. They know they have this debt, right? So you have to get some satisfaction out of helping folks work through this process.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, my favorite is really to, if they're in the stage of default and they have 1 or 2 lawsuits and we can get, a lawsuit dismissed because of something that the creditor did wrong in court. I mean, that's kind of my favorite. I know that's not the client's goal necessarily when they come to see me, is to not pay the debt at all that they think they may or may not owe. But if it's been passed around and they can't get their evidence together and file it correctly in the court, then, yeah, that is the most satisfying thing, really, to get the debt dismissed where you pay $0 on a $20,000 debt, for example. But yeah, certainly, when it's all said and done, resolving the debt, the people want control, right? And so even with the debt settlement programs, they're just making a monthly payment to this place and they don't really necessarily have control. Creditor can step out and file a lawsuit against them. And so the client's in control, we're in control. It's not uncharted territory, right? I mean, it's fairly predictable, and you're giving the client the ability to save money on his or her own and resolve the debt on his or her own terms, which is great.
That is great. David, what kind of takeaways do you have for people who may be watching this and considering looking into a debt settlement?
The takeaway is to talk to an attorney about the situation, right? So, I'm a bankruptcy attorney, and Chapter 13 bankruptcy would be the most comparable thing to a debt settlement program. And so I definitely take a look at that first. Chapter 13 gives you an automatic stay where creditors can't sue, creditors can't call you. You'll start rebuilding your credit when you file it. So that just depends on income and assets. So Leslie, if a client has this rent house or some other piece of property or asset that would require them to pay back all of the debt into Chapter 13, then instead take a loan out on the property, sell the property in the future, not right away, and be in control and settle the debt for half. And so the takeaway is, a Chapter 13 bankruptcy or settling the debt is going to be much more economical than paying the creditors on their terms. The takeaway is that these terms are set up in such a way where you're going to be paying way more if you're not paying the total balance right away. That's just the way it works.
That's great. I think you hit it with the word control. Helping people get control of their finances.
Yeah, that's it. They feel out of control. The bills come in, I can't make the minimum, or I can, but it's not going anywhere. Yeah, so it's just taking a hard look at everything and figuring out, okay, how many years is it going to take to get out of this, and how much money, and let's do it. And if you're saving if you have college expenses, you have everything else that a family requires to do, and you're carrying this load of credit card debt, right? So you need to stop paying it, start paying for the kids' college, have a plan to deal with the debt as it becomes a problem in a year or two. And you have more time than you think. When you stop paying and send cease and desist letters, some creditors might sue in 6 months. Most of them take a year, sometimes 2 or 3. So that, you've got time. Yeah, you retake control, and then you have time to assess things, free up some money for some family necessities, and make a plan to resolve the debt at a later date.
Attorney David Shuster, thank you so much, as always, for your input on this subject today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Leslie. Thank you.
We want to thank all of you for watching this episode of Ask the Lawyers. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can see all of the episodes of Ask the Lawyers. I'm Leslie Rohde for AskTheLawyers.com, where you can choose a lawyer that lawyers choose.